Welcome to We Have Issues, a podcast where we examine important issues throughout the educational community. Our special guest today is Dr. Sam Bommarito, who has a 51-year career in education. Now, you've got to tip your hat to that. Teaching every grade from kindergarten through graduate school. That deserves a second tip. He has served as both the chair of the St. Louis and the Missouri International Literacy Association, known to some as ILA, affiliates. He's made numerous presentations at ILA, formerly the International Reading Association, or IRA, conferences, including national conferences. In 2022, he was a featured speaker at the LitCon conference. He presented at LitCon again this year. He was also the main speaker at the ILA conference in Albany, New York. Recently, he was appointed to ILA's Dina Fidelson's Research Award Committee. Most of his career was spent working in Title I buildings as a reading specialist and/or staff developer. He has a weekly blog about literacy, which can be found at drsam7.blog. Thank you for your service to the literacy community, Dr. Sam Bommarito, and welcome to We Have Issues.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and it's very gracious. And listeners out there, please do take a look at the blog. That's a weekly thing, and it's one of the things I do to try to get word out there on some, to bring kind of things sensibly to the middle, is what I hope to do.
And your blog has a lot of good information. So if you are an expert in literacy, if you dabble in literacy, or you just wish to learn about literacy, that's the place to go. And I'm telling you this from experience. I'll spend 5 or 10 minutes there and learn things that I had no idea even existed. So it's a good experience. And yeah, check out Sam's blog. But I want to jump into our issues, because the first thing I want to ask you is something that I asked our colleague, Dr. Tim Rasinski, just a couple of days ago when I interviewed him. What type of reader were you as a child?
Well, it turns out my dad had me reading before I ever went to kindergarten. So and interestingly enough, this is really going to date me. I was in that 1950 Dick and Jane sight-say methodology. So, and I honestly didn't learn about phonics until I started teaching it. And by the way, I would never recommend sight-say as the main way to do reading. But and in terms of the kind of reader I was, I had some really favorite books like Mark Twain, Tom Sawyer, and things like that younger. Now my wife, who is an avid reader, is on me all the time, because these days I'm either reading a children's book or I'm reading professional development books. And she's out there reading all these other wonderful things, but those are my forte. You know, that's what I want to do. And I'll tell you what, some of those children's books, I think will put some of her books on notice that, you know, some of those children's authors have some really wonderful things going on. So that's the kind of reader I was and have been.
That's great to know. Let me ask you also, when you were in school, how did they teach you to read?
You know, well, actually, I don't think they did. I was one of those that I already knew how. I was always like way ahead of the curve. But as I said, it was sight-say, where you memorize some words and that kind of thing. And boy, that's not at all what I would ever recommend. But that's how it was done back in the day. And I'm someone that actually read from and learned from Dick and Jane. My goodness.
Now, the sight-say, I know is used a lot, or was used a lot at the elementary level. But when you moved up to the middle level, when you moved up to high school, were they covering any of the reading, or was it, here's the literature, let's go?
Oh, it's here's the literature, let's go. Yeah, okay. Absolutely.
So it was kind of a survival thing at that point.
Yeah, you sink or swim. But the thing was that I've always been interested in different topics. And when I get into a topic, oh my gosh, self-taught, which has its downsides, by the way.
Sometimes. Now, when you first discovered that you were looking to pursue a career in the field of literacy, what was going on? Did somebody inspire you? Did you see someone struggling? What was your motivation?
Okay, well, it's a double-layered story here. It turns out that this was back in the Vietnam era, and I joke that I won the draft lottery. So I was drafted out of my teaching job, teaching high school social studies. And I'll tell you what, back in that day and even today, high school social studies is not the best career move for a teacher. The positions are few and far between. So I was looking for something that I was really passionate and interested in that would get me a job because I'd lost my job. Believe it or not, I was drafted out of my job and got working in a private school for some time. Didn't begin to pay enough to raise a family on. And so I needed a better job. Fortunately for me, I found out that, I shopped around, what kind of things could I do? And I instantly saw that, helping people with reading is what I wanted to do. And by the way, I have been a lifelong teacher. When I was in the service, the sergeant major had me train the other clerks because he knew I liked to do it. When I was doing swimming, I taught the swimming lessons because I'll teach anything I can. But reading and helping, I love to help people. And the overall, the field, just the more I got into it, the more it was a really good fit for me.
Now, a lot of teachers and literacy specialists have found over the years that there are low levels of literacy, and in any classroom, you can find that. And this seems to be a challenge to one and all. So, is there a certain tendency or a certain element that you can attribute to these major causes of students having low levels of literacy, or is there one way that this comes about? Is it a multifaceted problem?
Well, I, for years, taught the course in analysis and correction, and the book that I used was Harrison Sippy. And that book went into the causes of reading problems, and they are multiple and complex. And now we have people trying to say, oh, no, the main cause of reading problems is we're doing balanced literacy, and that's creating all the problems. Well, in my opinion, those people are just creating a scapegoat. The true causes are multi-causes. The one cause that I'm the most familiar with, I spent over 30 years in Title I classrooms, and that was both in urban and rural settings. And I've seen the impact of poverty, and I've read about the impact of poverty in other areas. I think that is a huge, crucial reason behind literacy problems. And for us to pretend that it's something else, for us to pretend that, oh, no, it's just that we're doing bad teaching when we have bad teachers. Oh, I'm sorry. I've dealt with many a teacher over the years, and we have many, 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 many good teachers. And overcoming the problems of poverty is one of the key things. And we can't do that by denying that it creates the problem. So if you're looking for my number one on the list, I think poverty has got to be it, and its impact has got to be it. And I'll have more to say about that later.
How much does the lack of self-esteem that comes about from being in a poverty situation hinder or almost damper the reading process?
It can destroy children if you let it. And one of the first things when I was teaching analysis and correction and how to help kids, the There's the head part and the heart part. And if you don't do the heart part first, you're not going to get anything done on the head part. So you've got to motivate, you've got to reach them. And that is so crucial. And you've got to be real with them. They know whether or not you care. And sometimes just that is enough to get you in the door for them to be willing. The other thing is having things that will give them quick success when you're first starting with them. Many times you have this child that's been through trauma after trauma after trauma. Nothing's worked for them. They're convinced that it's all them. And if you can find something that can get them going early on, then you'll be a winner. And by the way, for me, language experience and creating their own language experience stories has always been my go-to thing, because then they become writers. They believe in themselves. So I can't just understate the importance of motivation.
Now, it sounds to me that you're saying there's a science to teaching reading, but there's also an art to teaching reading, that we're dealing with facts and figures, but we're also dealing with living, breathing people who have needs and wants and desires and situations. So how much of these components affect each other? Is it more that the science should come first, the art should come first, or is it the artful blend of the science together with the art?
I love that phrase, artful blend, and I don't want to steal Dr. Rosinski's thunder there, but Dr. Rosinski's got it nailed. So if you want to read it, I know you just interviewed him, read his book, and you'll have a really good answer to that. Concerning that art and science, I always started all my courses with a slide where I promised everyone, here's the stuff that works with every kid every time. And then I put up a blank slide. So that's the issue there. You've got to do what each kid needs and know how to do that. That's easily said if you're working one-on-one, easily done if you're working one-on-one. Not so easy if you've got whole classes, but it is possible. So that's the key. You've got to meet the children's needs and know what those needs are. And that takes being kid watchers. And boy, I'm using a politically incorrect term there, am I not? But you've got to be a kid watcher and learn. The child will teach you as much as you'll teach them. Their writing will teach you things. If you look carefully at their writing, they'll tell you all about their reading. So it takes that. Yes, it is a blend of art and science, but that doesn't mean that we underdo the science. And once again, I think Tim's got it nailed and has said it better than anyone.
Now, as you know, there's a lot out there about we should teach word recognition, we should teach phonics instruction, we should combine them, we should do something else. And I know that both you and Tim take more of a centrist position. Could you speak a little bit to that?
Sure. Well, first of all, if all the kid can do is decode, then they're not reading. Reading requires meaning making in some form or another. That's why I'm attracted to things like Nell Duke's model, where the active model of reading, or things like Scanlon's model, where it's a problem-solving model of reading. And what that means is it takes doing both. Not only does it take doing both, but it takes doing both concurrently. And that's where I and some of the science of reading gurus who are in social media, and that's a different breed of cat than some of the other science of reading. The science of reading gurus are in social media seem to think, get the right recognition done first and then move. No, it's a concurrent thing. And if you don't do it concurrently, if the kids don't learn from day one that it's about making meaning, if that's not in the kid's head, then you're not going to get the result that you want. So it is reciprocal, and it takes doing both concurrently.
Timothy Shanahan's a distinguished professor emeritus at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and he developed Reading First and the Common Core state standards, which are, as you know, federal policies that have formed the backbone of K-12 literacy for over a decade. And Professor Shanahan seems to believe that we're still not teaching enough kids to read and write effectively. And it's his observation that part of the problem is that schools aren't adapting quickly enough to the changing needs in this information age that we have. But he says that even more importantly, the U.S. school system has a tendency to get distracted by initiatives centered on individual literacy skills and specific groups of learners, instead of doing the harder work of building reading programs focused on a broader range of skills across grade levels, such as teaching students how to make sense of difficult texts, how to read effectively in the various disciplines they study in middle and high school, and how to use generative writing to deepen the knowledge they encounter in texts. So do you find that Professor Shanahan is on target with that?
Well, what I always say about Professor Shanahan is I don't always agree with him, but I have always learned from him. His is one. I have some sites that I tell people you got when I'm in servicing teachers. I tell them, here's our sites you need to go to. His is at the top of the list of ones you need to go talk to him. The other thing about Professor Shanahan is he is a real spokesman for science of reading, not like some of the pseudo spokespeople in the social media branch. So, and what I like most about him is he'll ask you for research. If you say, I want Blasey, the first thing he'll say, Sam, show me the research. And so I can deal with someone like that because I think I've got research to back up some of the ideas I'm doing. So I was incredibly glad that most recent blog that he did, where he said we have to look at the big picture. I think that tracks exactly with P. David Pearson's observations all those years ago, that we need to look at the big picture. We are getting, I think they're both correct. We're getting sidetracked into into minor issues and to issues almost like turf wars instead of looking at the big picture. Now, there are things that I don't agree with Dr. Shanahan on. I think I want a little more balance between direct teaching and inquiry learning than I think I see him calling for. So there are places where we would differ. But on that point, I think he's right on target. And I talk science of reading, especially his article in the Reading Research Quarterly on that topic, I think is the article to go to first to find out what it's all about. The last place I would look are some of the social media pundits who really have no clue. Compare Dr. Shanahan's forgotten more than they know, kind of thing. So I have an admiration for him. I don't always agree with him, but he definitely, I think, is a force in the field. And I'll say it one more time. I was so happy to see him go for that idea of looking at the broader issues. I think that's the way to go. So I think he's on target there.
So would you think that the folks who want phonics only, eliminate everything else, are a bit off base?
A bit off base wouldn't even begin to. Okay. If you want to create a nation of word callers who can read word lists to you and test well on reading word lists to you and give you miraculous results on reading word lists to you, if that's what you need out there, then go with the overdoing phonics and underdoing the rest. If you want actual readers and thinkers and inquirers, and that's what the world economy needs, then you need to make a different course. Now, I do want to say something here because I have been talking to people for the longest time. Some of them get off on extremes that are extreme as what you're saying. But some of them who are science of reading advocates, and they are on social media, are looking at all 5 of the pillars. So I don't want to fall victim to something I say not to do, which is strawman, to claim that they don't look at all the different things would be a straw man's claim. I can find you people that do that, okay, but I don't think that that they really represent science of reading. So I guess here I am. I'm being a middle person again, saying anyone that says that you need, well, first of all, if you say you need to do the word corrections, or the word teaching them how to decode first, is simply wrong. You have to do it concurrently. And that's one place where many people and I disagree. It's a concurrent reciprocal relationship. But anyone that goes to the extreme of saying, I can teach them all these things and everything's going to be fine. Well, everything's going to be fine if you want a word caller who can read lists to you. If you want a thinker, not so much.
In teaching fluency and trying to figure out what strategy to use according to age and developmental levels, what can a teacher in a school system do to best serve that population of students? Is it read some articles? Is it try to do some different things? Is it expose them to as many things as possible? Just pick a few from each of the baskets? What would a teacher have to do?
Actually, it's none of the above. What I see, Tim, again, has put together the Mega Book of Fluency. And in that, he gives a whole range of things that you can and should do. And that range includes kids from kindergarten through and including high school. Tim's forte, Tim Rosinski, is the repeated reading and the power of repeated reading. Now, and reading to perform. So if you're reading the same piece several days in a row, and you know that when all is said and done, you're going to perform that piece, he has data that shows that has a powerful impact both on fluency and on comprehension. And I've been using his ideas in my classes that I'm still working with for years now, and it's a very successful thing. He has a beginning program for that. I guess the thing that I would recommend for teachers to do first would be simply to buy his Mega Book of Fluency and take it from there, because you'll and the idea, and Tim and his colleagues have put together some really real lessons around what to teach and how to teach it. So it isn't just willy-nilly do whatever you want. I guess my final answer, Tim Rosinski and his books.
Now, I've been teaching almost as long as you have. I'm going to be starting my 50th year in November.
Oh, well, thank you for that. Oh, good.
So we're about from the same era. And one thing that I'm a huge advocate of is reading to kids. And Tim and I talked a little bit about this when we chatted. And I think that we don't read enough across curricula. We don't give kids an opportunity to hear sounds enough across curricula. I remember in college reading Lawrence Perrine's Sound and Sense, and it made such good sense to me, no pun intended, because there was the sensibility of the words. But I remember Perrine saying, if you don't have the sounds to go to match the meaning, to drive the point, that you're losing so much. And it kind of goes back to the point you made earlier, where you have to be more than just a one-dimensional instructor. You have to bring some things to the forefront, and you have to provide opportunities looking at your population and deciding, how can I best address that population? And Does it differ every year? Because I know for me it does.
Well, I think on the whole business of reading aloud to students, Molly Ness is my hero there. Molly wrote a reading an ILA paper on that that was published a couple of years back, and has all the research you need to show that there's a benefit to doing that, and there's a benefit to doing that at all grade levels. It's not just for the little kids. Add to that, and this is a little off topic, but not very off topic, readers theater, and what Rosinski and the others have done. Dr. Chase Young has a place where you can go in on his website and download hundreds of readers theater, and having kids perform and do readers theater and hear that. And for me, one of the first things any kid I teach learns is you have to read like a storyteller. I wrote a song about that. You have to read like a storyteller. And once my wife can tell when I've worked with a kid, because there are no robots in my classroom. You got to make their voice go up and down and do all those things. And so the read aloud and giving them that model to work for is crucial. And besides that, while you're doing that, you're building background. And, that's one of the things that we're all about. Oh, let's get the kids these backgrounds. Did it ever occur to anyone? I hope so, that wide reading and reading aloud would build background. That's the way it's done, folks. And we seem to have lost sight of that. So, I'm a huge advocate of reading aloud. And I think something that Chase Young said, and he's a co-author with Tim, to me, Sam, these older kids love it. They love doing, you would have thought not, but they buy into it. So if I have some skeptical secondary teachers out there, you can't try it. And try it the way Chase does it, and try it the way Tim does it, and you won't be disappointed.
What you say rings true to me. I was in a local university class guesting on a Friday afternoon, and I went in to talk to the class that's getting their degree in literacy. So I did a poetry slam with them, and the reaction was unbelievable. They loved it. And these are 20, 21, 22, 23-year-olds who were just excited. And I even was told that when I come back to present at a conference this week, that some of them want to be there, but they want to make sure that I do the poetry slam again. And it's that whole idea, going back to you saying about self-esteem and feeling good and interacting, and what Tim says about doing the readers theater, and how you both believe that there needs to be that balance, that you need to find out what the kids need. And if they need a little bit more of one thing and maybe a little less of another at this time, then fine. But hearing the sounds, it's funny. I hope that the folks who are advocating for phonics would advocate for reading out loud as well, because they're both dealing with sound, and you're building that appreciation of sound that seems to be as critical as anything.
And I just spoke at an early learning conference just a few weeks ago, and actually got to watch Eric Litwin do his thing, and oh my gosh, he's a rock star. And get the teachers involved, and you wouldn't believe. I mean, you just wouldn't. They're active in a very active model of doing the reading and the rest, and that will draw people in. And of course, here in our state, we have David Harrison, who has gotten to in working with Tim on some things, and pushing poetry. So poetry works, and we did a whole thing on that in our Missouri Reader, our state journal. Poetry can work. And the other thing that I learned early on about poetry is so meaning rich. that it gives you little short passages that can give you a lot of content and information in short form. So it's a teaching tool that I think teachers, especially teachers of older children, just overlook. They don't realize the power of it until you get somebody like Tim or Chase Young or David Harrison. And I think, and David's got some other things published as well that bring people into that. And that can be a powerful teaching tool. Powerful.
One of the things I'm hoping that teachers do with poetry is not only address it. We're in April right now, and that's National Poetry Month. But as with anything else, it doesn't just stop in 1 month. It continues through the year. But I try to get my students to see the poetry in the everyday language as well, in the prose. Well done prose has poetry that drives it. And some of the things that kids don't always realize is they listen to public service announcements on the radio or watch them on TV. And I tell them that's poetry. And we write our own public service announcements because when we write our own poetry, it's the same process. It's just a different form. When they listen to advertisements on the radio or television, or they read the advertisements, it's very similar stylings. It's very similar skills, and it crosses over. And I know that the really good teachers recognize that there's a connection between the sound and the sense, between the literature and the writing, and between all the different aspects of the curricula. I hope that we all don't forget that when we get so overwhelmed with this concentration on testing that we have to close our doors and make sure that we get these scores. But what are we trading away in its place? That's the frightening part, I think, of a lot of our discussions.
Well, so you just tripped a wire for me because what you're doing is the whole business of that strong connection between reading and writing. And I can remember back in the day, Soke Nia saying, learn to read like a writer, Katie Wood Ray saying the same thing. And that was so powerful. And the thing is, what does that have to do with the kids that are having lots of trouble? For anybody that doesn't know what language experience is and what a language experience story is and how to teach using language experience, Google it, please, because that is a teaching tool that I use all the time. And the idea is you write down what the kid says, and then what the kid says becomes what they read back to you later on. And I've taught, I had one kid, 16 years old, never guessed what I was having him talk about, the driver's manual. And so he was writing things about the driver. Well, I had him hooked, and also had him reading when nobody else had him reading. At the age of 16, he was coming back. So that reading, writing connection and using language experience and the rest, there are so many powerful tools out there. And just for any teacher out there that isn't aware of that and wants something that will work with a lot of kids a lot of the times in a powerful way, Google language experience and find out about it.
This reminds me so much of the stories we used to hear in college where they would talk about the kid who couldn't read and couldn't do math and was having all kinds of trouble and was disingenuous and disconnected with everything going on in school. But after school, he would go home and he would work on his engine and meet certain specs and be able to get the cylinders at just the right bore and follow all these complicated directions. And there's got to be some connection there somewhere. You've got the kid turned on to something. Maybe there's a little bit to that after all.
Have them write a story about it. I'm serious, and read it back to you.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Now, a colleague of ours, a Twitter colleague of ours, Helen Prue.
Very, very good person. I know all about her.
Yeah, she said, make sure that I I say hi from her. She said she met you at one of the conferences, a LitCon conference, I believe.
Right.
And
say hi right back to her. She's an amazing person.
Yeah, terrific. She gave me some questions, and I'm using the same questions that I gave to Tim because I mentioned that I was going to be interviewing the two of you. And she said, "Oh, you're looking for questions? I would love to." Well, yeah, please. So she gave me three of them. Here's the first one.
Okay.
She says, "Do you have any suggestions on how teachers might incorporate practices that will ensure they grow and improve their literacy teaching over time?"
Okay. I'm going to put a plug in for my organization, the Missouri Literacy Association, St. Louis Literacy Association.
Sure.
If you join professional organizations like ours, we are doing professional development in lots of different ways, lots of different times. So by joining that kind of a group and coming into some of the things that we have over time, that is definitely something that I think any teacher would benefit from. In terms of it's a matter of how to teach more as much as it is what to teach. And that for me, as I looked over these three questions, the key here is to learn how to teach strategies using gradual release. Now, if you're teaching a strategy doesn't mean you name it. That's a step in the process, but that's not teaching a strategy. Teaching a strategy means that you get them to use and internalize it. And so learning to do that and learning the kinds of strategies that pay off would be a big thing. For instance, Lori Oquez, and I apologize, Lori. I always say your name wrong. Even when I interviewed you, I said your name wrong. But Lori has taken reciprocal teaching to a whole new level. And she, again, has all kinds of ways to get that kind of strategic teaching, how to teach a strategy. So learn how to teach a strategy, and with the notion that whatever strategy is you're teaching, you're going to get them to internalize and use it, and stay in that kind of an environment like we have in ILA, both in Missouri and in St. Louis, and as a matter of fact, in the nation. Lots of professional development ideas there. So, and not because you have to, but because you want to.
The strategies that you're talking about sound a little bit like Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, where you want to get someone to the point where they internalize and now they understand it so well that they're in that zone. Chiswick-Mahai took it and called it flow later on, but it's that whole feeling that you can almost function without a teacher, that the teacher is taking you to a certain point and now put the plan into your lap and it's now your plan.
Yeah. Gradual release of responsibility on steroids.
Right. Exactly.
So, and that's what you're after. And, but the key here is, and I'm a big fan of doing multiple strategies at once. I know some people like to just do one at a time, but multiple strategies at once. I'm also a big fan, and Shanahan had an impact on this. Shanahan was complaining in a blog that, teachers were making kids use strategies that they didn't need and already knew how to use, and they were wasting lots of class time doing that. And I got to thinking about what he was saying, and that made a lot of sense to me, that that's not the way to do it. On the one hand, if you're introducing a strategy and getting them to internalize it, you want to spend some instructional time. But then you do an off you go, maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And in 2 or 3 weeks, come back and tell me about the strategies that we've taught you and tell me about you using them. And that would be a terrific strategy lesson. So that's there's an idea I got from Shanahan. Goodness gracious. But he's right on target. You don't want to waste a lot of time teaching something they already know. And you don't want to go off and tell, you've got to use the thing that I'm going to tell you to use to fix this problem, no matter what, even if you think you know a better way. No, that's not really teaching. But rather, on each strategy we learn, we're going to show you the ropes. And then you come back every so often and tell me about what strategies you have been using and using it successfully. And by the way, if the kids are talking about what they're doing your teaching for you. And they're doing it in kid talk.
Yeah, so it's understandable and easy to be processed. Yeah. And there's an interest level that's raised naturally.
Yeah. So that's the whole bit there.
Helen's second question. What's the role of writing, and we've touched some of this already, in developing children's literate minds, and how might teachers leverage the power of writing in their classroom practices?
Okay. First of all, it's a reciprocal relationship. So writing and reading go hand in hand. As a teacher, learn to observe your students' writing. You'll learn a ton about what they know and don't know about phonics just by looking at their writing. And in getting writing and reading as it being reciprocal, you can use language experience is my battleship of the fleet kind of thing of that. But there are so many ways to use writing, and writing workshop has writing and reading workshop
Right.
Has had a huge influence on me over the years. So to leverage the power of writing, just make that part of everyday practice. There are the journals that you can use are the rest, but not fake kind of things. Genuine writing, the kind of thing you were talking about. Hey, let's write today's student announcements.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's powerful stuff.
Again, I go back to the 60s when all the uprisings were going on and people wanted things that were relevant, things that they could relate to. Now, some of it was taken a bit too far because at that point they were sometimes turning their back on the necessary foundation on which to build these skills. But it can't be minimized that whatever you can connect with, you're going to be more interested in. That's the basic common sense. I always think of Voltaire saying common sense is not always common. And I think he was right in some cases, but whatever the situation might be, it's making those connections.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're very wise saying that. Let me get to Helen's last question because it's a two-parter. First part, she asks, what are some ways that teachers can create opportunities for children to be independent learners who feel a sense of agency right from their earliest literary experiences? And her second part is, how might teachers help students develop independence, agency, and engagement with learners of any age?
Okay. Well, once again, looking at that gradual release model, you want to turn things over to them when you can. If you've got a little, well, I've done this with first graders. I've got little kindergartners right now I'm working with, and they create their own first books. Oh my gosh. And then when they go back to the class, I run off a copy of these books and we put it in the class library. So all of a sudden they're heroes and they're authors, and you're empowering them. So that's part of it. In terms of developing that independent agency, I'm going to be very politically incorrect because I learned a ton and a half from Lucy Calkins, and I learned a ton and a half from some of her cadres, like Katie Wood-Ray and Asoka Nia and the rest, and their workshop teaching methods, which I understand that some people are, oh, no, it's not enough direct teaching. Well, I'm of the opinion that you need that balance between direct teaching and inquiry. And I'll take you all the way back to Aristotle and Socrates. Aristotle was all about direct teaching and Socrates was all about inquiry. And those two things have existed since forever, and they've coexisted since forever. So, and part of that art is balancing the two. So I think that to create that sense of agency, workshop kind of approaches really do that. And I've watched when I first did looked at some of my first workshop things. I came in as a huge skeptic. I was, one of those. They didn't want me in the room, I think, sometimes. But then I came in and saw what they were accomplishing with these little first graders. I call it talking big about little books. If you've got something to talk about, and by the way, Dan ran to the fan and hit a pan, is not much to talk about. You need something that you actually talk about, and seeing that happen. So I think that agency and engagement, you need that balance between some direct teaching and some inquiry learning. And I'll just do a little reminder about the inquiry learning is what the people who are the educators around the world who look at, what we always hear about what's wrong with American education. But one of the things that's right and they like about us is that we create these problem solvers. We create these thinkers who know how to think through and solve problems. So if you take that problem solving model, and that's why I like Scanlon's work, if you take that kind of problem solving model and apply it from the very early stages, you're going to get yourself little thinkers who can actually work their way through problems and become self-sufficient. So there it is. And I know that that's not a politically correct way of doing things right now, but I've watched it work and it works.
Now, you've mentioned a lot of different gurus for you over the years. And have any of those been your real go-to people, the ones that have influenced you the most?
Well, I think it's apparent Rosinski has had a huge impact. P. David Pearson, if we had listened to him 2 decades ago, we wouldn't be in the mess we're in right now. P. David didn't just create the gradual release. He did more than that. And currently, I'm in awe of Rachel Gabriel. She is, I think, a new guru and on her way up. And Nell Duke. I mean, Duke is just in a situation by herself. And I don't want to make anybody mad by leaving anybody else off that list. But those are the people that are really kind of like, especially Gabriel and Duke right now, are having huge influences on what I say and do. And I'm learning something from them. I don't want to leave off Shanahan. I don't want, but he is. But again, I think in the long run, I hope to convince him that there's something more to inquiry and learning that I think he accepts for the moment. And maybe I'm misreading him. But as I said, I have those are the sites I go to. So if that gives you the list, Pearson, Rosinski, Gabriel, Calkins, and there we have it.
And parents are constantly looking at their struggling readers and wondering, how can I serve my child the best? And teachers are doing the same thing. What can they do to best serve their kids? I know we're all looking for the magic bullet, and we know one doesn't exist, but how can parents and teachers work together to address this issue and maybe help those struggling?
Well, part of it, I think, is reading to them, with them, talking to them.
I agree.
The details on how much we talk these days around family tables and the rest is just, oh my goodness, nobody's talking to anybody. So I think that kind of thing. Part of it, we have to be sensitive, especially when we deal with parents who are coming out of a situation of poverty and who themselves had reading problems. Okay, but you know what? Those parents can be empowered as well. I worked with them in Jennings for years, and they want. I think there is a misconception about what the poor parent is all about. When I saw these poor parents in Jennings, they were working 2 or 3 jobs, and that was their problem. They couldn't get to school enough to handle that, so we had to adjust things for them. And once they it's the same thing as with the kids. Once you show them some things that are successful, the language experience things and that kind of thing, it makes a difference. Something they do in some of the countries like Finland, and I know, but Finland isn't anything like us. They turn on the closed captioning, so the kids see the print. Boy, what a simple thing. And everybody has that. So why not? But the big thing is talking to them, getting the literacy rich environment. And that's where I have to have hats off to people all around the country, but most especially here in St. Louis. I have Julius Anthony and the St. Louis Black Authors getting books to people. And we have a ton of different organizations locally that are getting books into the book deserts, and Molly Ness's work around that. So getting books into kids' hands. And one last thing, for goodness sakes, bring back the nursery rhymes. I don't know how it ever happened that we stopped doing those, but that's always a good thing to do. Now, so all that said, be careful that we don't put ourselves in the position of saying, oh, it's all the parents' fault if they just do blasey, blasey, blasey. No, that's not it. But what is it is bringing them on board. And by the way, in my time in that urban setting in Jennings, and we had over 90% free lunch at that point, we went from our parent involvement things attracting as many as 3 people to attracting hundreds.
Yeah.
And the difference was we turned it into part of it is we let the parents be in charge of it. And so they came up with ideas like, well, let's make it like a church social. Let's have an ice cream social. Let's have a flashlight read in the gym and that kind of thing. So bring the parents in and don't be afraid to do that. So I guess I've rambled there, but
and you say
they're
that
your partner. Don't forget it.
you bring to mind the visiting artists who come into a classroom, come into a building, and add so much to a program. We, for years here in the Chester schools in New Jersey, have brought in visiting authors, visiting writers, visiting poets, sometimes visiting artists or illustrators, and it adds a whole another dimension to what we're doing in the classroom, and it reinforces things that we can only speak sometimes from a secondary position rather than a primary position.
Yeah.
And it gets the kids excited. And that's the important thing. They get excited.
Well, we have organizations here in St. Louis that, like I was at Laclede Elementary for quite a number of years. Whoops, wrong building. Okay. Well, I was at a building in North St. Louis County where we had local authors come in on a weekly basis, and we had a grant for that. And she would come in and help the kids with the writing and all the rest. And that did make a huge difference. So yes, that peas in a pod, huh?
You do a tremendous blog, and I want to give you a little time to talk about that as well.
Okay, well, I think what I'm trying to do is take a centrist position, okay, which says, let me outline who's got it completely right. I'm done. Okay. The idea nobody's got it completely right. And what that means, well, that's step one of having a conversation then.
Yeah.
We've got to admit there are some times we've got to be willing to say, my favorite methods might have limitations. My favorite methods might not work all the time or work with every kid. And if we're willing to buy in that far and then talk to each other and find that common ground, we can stop all the silly bickering that goes on. And I call it silly on purpose. And I think by taking that kind of a centrist position that says nobody's got it all right, but if we would be willing to stop all the cantankerism Is that a word? I just made it up. Shakespeare makes up words. I just made up cantankerism.
Right.
Okay, so stop all the cantankerism, and let's just be willing to be big enough to admit no one method has it all. And when the methods that I think should be working aren't working, be willing to look at what the other methods are. And I think there are some people that just want to shut down the conversation. There are some people that have a one size fits all. We've got all the answers. Don't you even think about doing anything else. As a matter of fact, we're going to legislate it to make sure you can't think about anything else. Well, all those people are going to do in the long run is cause another pendulum swing, because they don't have something that's going to work for every child. And so it's a matter of time before folks realize that. And we get yet another swing. And it's going to be an expensive swing, because we have all these programs that are quite expensive going on that aren't really getting the job done either. So why go through all that? Why not talk to each other, and don't let the people that say we've got the one and only solution dominate the conversation. Let's the rest of us talk and see what we can learn from each other. And I think that's kind of the essence of what my blog is about and centrism is about. And it seems to have found an audience.
When you say this, it triggers in my mind the old saying that there's a reason we have one mouth and two ears. And I think it's a very simple statement, but there may be some wisdom there that we do need to listen a little bit more than we speak. It's a good suggestion, I think.
And surprising things can happen. People that I would have never in a million years thought would have any agreement with me. There was a gentleman down in Florida who is head of one of the organizations out there, and I was making the case against retention, and it turns out his psychology association down there in Florida has taken a position against it. So all of a sudden, a person I would have never in a million years thought would be in agreement. And by the way, NSET, kudos to NSET for being against that from the get-go. It does all kinds of harm. Well, so look for things like that where the people on all sides can possibly agree and say, this was a bad idea at the outset. Let's not do that. But when conversation gets shut down because some people have a particular message and they won't accept any other, don't let those people dominate the conversation. Let's the rest of us talk.
Now, Sam, I know there are folks listening to this thinking, I really like the ideas this guy has, and we'd like him to come to our district and maybe speak to us or consult a little bit for us. How can they reach you?
Okay. In my blog or on Twitter, you can send me a direct message and via my blog. But the big thing is, and this is Bommarito Sam at yahoo.com. And if it's a request for speaking engagement or professional development, just put that in the title to catch my. So it's Bommarito, B-O-M like in Mary M, A-R-I-T-O, Sam, S-A-M, at yahoo.com is the main way to reach me. And of course, you can reach me through the blog as well. But this Yahoo thing I found works the best. And I'd be delighted to speak or do professional development or that kind of thing. And actually, I'm starting to get requests to do that. So that's kind of nice.
Dr. Sam Bommarito, this has been an absolute joy. I can't tell you how much I've had a learning experience that is memorable. Sitting here and chatting with you today, you've taken time out of your busy schedule to be with us on We Have Issues, and the insight that you brought along to literacy education and the whole process of literacy is thorough, it's efficient, it's uncanny, and I think it's needed. It's welcomed and it's needed. So thank you for taking your time with us.
Well, thank you for the taking your time, and thank you for all the good work that you're doing. I notice you tend to be a popular person at conventions and things, not to mention your classes. Your people seem very, very, very much engaged. So kudos, and boy, I'm just happy to do this anytime.
Once again, thanks, Sam. It's a pleasure. Well, that concludes this episode of We Have Issues, where we examine important issues throughout the educational community. I'm your host, Joe Pizzo. Have a wonderful day.